If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Welcome to Mindshock True Crime. You are listening to the Jonbenet Ramsey series. This is episode 12, John Andrew Ramsey. We are finally getting to John Andrew, long speculated by some to be the guilty party in this case. This is, of course, Mindshock, where the only thing we know for sure is that we don't know anything for sure. I do not claim anything is true or untrue. I examine many different theories, and we do so in a logical fashion, attempting not to fall for any logical fallacies. As always, if you enjoy the podcast, find it interesting and informative, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. You can also support the channel by becoming a YouTube member right here on YouTube and get access to exclusive streams and chats. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Like and share the podcast. Keep up awareness in unsolved cases, missing persons cases, and wrongful convictions. Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get a priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcast, or requests. You could also be a guest in the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. So a logical, comprehensive look at John Andrew has been requested on Mindshock for quite some time. So I aim to please the Mindshock listeners. So we will be attempting to figure out John Andrew's exact movements and why some people believe he could be the responsible party. Of course, his suitcase with his DNA on a stained blanket or bed sheets or whatever, highly suspect that just happens to be in the basement. I mean, what is the justification for that? For those that believe that it was either John Ramsey, Patsy Ramsey, or them covering for Burke, what would be the point of framing their other son? I mean, that doesn't make a lot of sense, especially if they're going to go with the intruder kidnapping theory and frame that. So that's something the family did it people do not ever properly address, and it is a major curiosity. All right, so let's start this episode off with a major mind shock right away. Some kind of tip in the early days that John Andrew was somehow responsible for what happened to Jonbenet Ramsey. So from the book Perfect Murder, Perfect Town, page 199, expert said this: killer knew Jonbenet. Jonbenet Ramsey knew her killer, and the killer had already had ready access to the family home. A renowned criminologist told the Denver Post Robert Ressler, who for 16 years was a profiler for the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit and the first manager of the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, told the Post that his study of the case, including a visit to Boulder this week, convinces him that the 6-year-old was not killed by a stranger. Howard Pankratz, the Denver Post, January 31st, 1997. When the Star received a tip on February 5th that John Andrew Ramsey had tried to arrange the death of his half-sister Jonbenet, they passed the information to the Boulder police. A sometime police informant had told the tabloid that on the weekend of either Memorial Day or July 4th, 96, while the Ramsey family was vacationing in Michigan, John Andrew had offered him $10,000 to ram a powerboat into a smaller boat that would be carrying him and Jonbenet. Supposedly, John Andrew would... I'm sorry. This is... this is kind of hard to believe. But let me finish here. Supposedly, John Andrew would jump overboard to safety just before impact, and Jonbenet he hoped would be killed. I mean, first of all, how sane is John Andrew Ramsey? I'm not calling the tipster a liar. I mean, I don't know. Maybe he's insane. I don't know. How sane is John Andrew? Because is this the way that you would arrange someone to be killed? You would be there with them? I mean, what if he doesn't jump out in time? Then they both get killed. I mean, it's kind of a weird, Ramming power boats? I mean, that's the way he wanted it to be done? Okay, anyway, the informant told the Star that he had rejected the offer. Detective Jane, I mean, wow. Is ramming powerboats the go-to for rich people to take out siblings they don't like? I mean, how many times has that been done, by the way? Has that ever successfully been implemented? That's curious. Detective Jane Harmer was a... I didn't see that coming. I mean, I don't know. That would not be my number one way to take somebody out. I mean, are we talking split second reflexes? I mean, is John Andrews some kind of freak athlete where he'd be able to time it perfectly so it wouldn't look suspicious? And where was this even going to be done? Because if this was going to be done in some remote area, what's the point of that? I mean, couldn't he just throw her overboard? I mean, I don't know. This is all kind of weird. Or does John Andrew have like a really twisted sense of humor where he was just screwing around and the tipster was telling the truth, but there was never any intention to follow through with this? I mean, again, we don't know. Some rich people have really bizarre senses of humor. Alright, Detective Jane Harmer was assigned to follow up on the tip. The informant was interviewed by local police in Waterford, Michigan, where he repeated the story he'd told the tabloid. 2 weeks later, the Boulder police discovered that the informant had a dubious history. A check of Michigan police agencies revealed that he had come under suspicion, first for possibly planting drugs in an alleged dope house, and second for refusing to take a polygraph test to confirm information he had provided in a cocaine investigation. I mean, that's not that dubious of a history. By the end of February, Boulder police had decided that the informant's accusations were unfounded, and yet another lead in the Ramsey case would go nowhere. I mean, that is kind of weird, though. So, I mean, the main crux of the John Andrew theory by many is that neighbor Joe Barnhill, the older neighbor that we had gone over, he had the boarder in his basement, Glenn Meyer. And of course, Glenn Meyer's former wife was the one who blew the whistle on him. We went over that in episode 6, The Neighborhood. So make sure you check out the previous episodes in this series to keep up here. But apparently the history with Barnhill's account is he initially said that he saw someone he thought was John Andrew Ramsey at about 5:30 p.m. the night of the death. However, later on, his testimony somehow changed to stating he wouldn't be able to pick John Andrew out of a crowd. And the Boulder Police Department apparently just accepted that as gospel, and that was the end of that. So, but what's crazy is that if it wasn't John Andrew, there was somebody else there. Unless they're trying to claim he's so old and senile, he wouldn't be able to identify, even tell whether a human being was outside of a house. So, wow, okay. The other thing that we went over in the previous episode also is there was also a sighting that early morning of a man running away from the house. And this is also something that has basically been swept under the rug. A lot of curiosities that night and that early morning. There's something else here. I'm on miscarriageofjustice.co right now. There's a lot of old forums here, not even that old, 2019, supposedly, unless these were copy and pasted. But apparently there's a quote here. I don't know what the origin of this quote is. This is allegedly from John Ramsey himself. I don't know which interview. The killer said he would call the home and give instructions. John said that there was a call that came in around 10 a.m. and the caller did not say anything. Was this the killer making the call? And so, and I don't know the exact time the FBI got the phone tap set up. Was that closer to noonish? So is this John Ramsey just making up more stories, as some allege? Was there a silent call at 10 a.m.? Was it a wrong number? Was it the killer? What is up with that call? I have not been able to find too much information on that. This is just another one of these little tidbits that gets lost along the way, and when you have enough of them, you can't tell which one might possibly be the smoking gun, like the guy, like a man running away from the Ramsey home that morning. I mean, that's just kind of weird how nobody's talking about this. So a few more accounts here, as well as Melinda, John Ramsey's sister. So this is the other line of the family, of course. The John Ramsey's current family was, of course, Patsy Ramsey and their two children, Jonbenet Ramsey and Burke Ramsey. From his other marriage, John Ramsey had John Andrew and Melinda Ramsey. Okay, so apparently, Melinda, John Andrew, and Stuart Long, Melinda's boyfriend, turned up at the scene, and then they were taken away in separate cars. This was approximately 1:30 p.m. The official story is that she flew in with John Andrew. They left early from Atlanta to meet John and Patsy in Minneapolis that morning, only they were rerouted when they landed to Denver. Then they got the taxi to Boulder. So supposedly, the three of them are traveling together, Melinda, her fiancé Stuart Long, and John Andrew. Now, there's a lot of curiosities here. So from Paula Woodward's book, this is a quote here, when we got to the house in Boulder, I remember seeing police setting up yellow tape around the yard. Dad and Patsy were outside with friends, and Dad was crying. Patsy looked awful. Dad said Jonbenet is with Beth. That's my sister who was killed in a car crash. My mind played tricks on me. I was already in shock. My first reaction was that Jonbenet had not died. It was that Beth was taking care of Jonbenet while she was still kidnapped. We all almost immediately got into cars and went to a family's friend's home. When we got there, Patsy couldn't even sit up, so I went to comfort her. Melinda told Patsy, we're going to get her back. It's going to be okay. And Patsy told Melinda, no, Melinda, you don't understand. Your dad found her in the basement. She's dead. I remember thinking this would kill them. After all, my sister Beth was killed in a car wreck. It was just so awful. I didn't think they could take another loss like this. I thought they'd be dead in a year from sheer grief. Patsy already seemed dead inside. Her whole body was pale and gray. She just wasn't there. Dad was sobbing continuously. His way of dealing was to pace and cry. So these are Melinda's statements. What do we make of that? And apparently Stuart Long said that John Ramsey found Jonbenet at 11 a.m. And again, he could just be misreporting. A lot of inconsistencies here. And the 1 hour time difference from Minneapolis. Here's an interesting post on the miscarriage of justice.co forums. The post starts with the Patsy Ramsey interview, God knows who you are and we will find you, pointing her finger at the killer. The comment here, it is hard to imagine that the person who committed that crime of murder would make such a claim to the world. Has it ever happened before? I know people to swear an oath to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, and yet lie. The gravestone for Jonbenet is odd in that the date of her death is December 25th, 1996. In my theory, her death was on the day after, on the 26th, in the early morning thereof. The inscription of the tomb, love, purity, and joy, a gift to her family and the world, home in the peace of God. Others have noted John Ramsey can write a book and not mention John Andrew at all. I noted he had an hour interview without a mention of John Andrew. A book seems even longer. If I had to nominate anyone, I'd keep an eye on Melinda and John Andrew and how their alibis were backed by their mom, Lucinda. Brad and Chris could be part of it too. Law enforcement tried to get to the truth back then. It would be virtually impossible now unless the evidence they have is released for public scrutiny. The next bit is the basis of my theory. In my opinion, it points to something happening between the Ramsey siblings. There was a huge fortune, so there was plenty of motive to reduce the number of beneficiaries to the estate. I'd say any talk of $1 billion business, etc., is enough to get some people scheming. Money is a common theme in murders. Top this off with the possible incestuous relationships between the kids and Jonbenet beginning to speak about it. There could be the additional motive to shut her up. But the Ramsey family all had lawyers and they became impossible to crack. But it is evident that the two older siblings were on the outer and were being given a cold Christmas, so I wouldn't be surprised they planned something to interfere with Patsy's birthday treat, the big red boat cruise. The timing of finding Jonbenet at the moment that John, Andrew, and Melinda turn up seems significant to me. The way everything was made to point to Patsy is also very significant in my opinion. Interesting. Also, apparently Chief Kohler stated that according to John Ramsey's account, one of the intruders must have remained hiding in the home long after the police arrived on the scene to investigate the kidnapping. This is what my theory demands as well. Can anyone accept what Chief Kohler is saying and what John Ramsey's account demands? It is the last thing anyone would expect that the morning that the kidnapper would still be on the property. Once the friends are invited over for support, any alarms would have been turned off, so the exit is possible up through the kitchen and out the butler's door. That door was later found open. As I understand the floor plans, there were 2 stairways in the basement, one to the kitchen, the other to the butler's kitchen. You know what else is curious, too? Is it possible that John Andrew was spotted by Joe Barnhill and the other neighbor in the morning? So he was spotted the night before, then he was spotted running away the morning of? Or was it just a guy who looked like John Andrew? I mean, there's no shortage of suspects of guys in the neighborhood. Another curiosity regarding Melinda Ramsey is that the palm print on the door was apparently attributed to Melinda, but it was explained away as that was from one of her previous visits to the house. A comment here, as far as I know, you can't tell when a finger or palm print is made, you can only identify it. Interesting. Now, supposedly one investigator is claiming that John Andrew made an ATM withdrawal and had a receipt of it 9 p.m. Christmas night. I'm assuming this was Atlanta. And he was with a friend. Now, is there video in that ATM back in 96? Possibly not. They're stating the receipt is proof, which it's not really proof because you can give your ATM card and PIN to anybody to make a withdrawal if you're planning something, but I don't know. Brian Morgan wrote to Detective Thomas on March 4th. This is how long it took to get their alibis, stating that John Andrew made an ATM transaction at the QT store on Roswell Road in Marietta, Georgia at 9 p.m. on December 25th. His friend Brad Millard had been present. To support his claim, Morgan enclosed the ATM transaction slip. He also repeated that Melinda had awakened her brother in the early morning hours of December 26th, in time for him to stop at a store and still make the 8:30 a.m. flight to Minneapolis. It was impossible for John Andrew to have flown from Atlanta to Boulder, whether by commercial or private aircraft, commit the murder, and return in time to be awakened by his sister in the presence of Brad Millard, who had stayed overnight in John Andrew's room. I mean, obviously it'd be far easier just to get 2 people to lie. I mean, I don't know. Alright, so let's go to candyrose.com, which has a lot of great info on the Jonbenet Ramsey case. John Andrew Ramsey, so Barnhill thought he saw John Andrew in Boulder Christmas Day. John Andrew and Melinda are being publicly cleared on March 7th, 97. So it looks like, at least for John Andrew, what publicly cleared him was the word of 2 other humans, possibly 3 if we're including his mother, and an ATM receipt, not an ATM video. So he is a sophomore at the University of Colorado at the time. Interesting. I mean, the amount of connections through the University of Colorado are crazy. I think I went over this before. There are 87 colleges and universities in Colorado, according to ballotpedia.org, higher education in Colorado. So between 93 and 2016, higher education in Colorado. So 87 colleges. So 29 public institutions, 18 nonprofit private schools, 44 private institutions. So a lot of goofs were saying, "Oh, well, there's only like one or two universities in Colorado." I mean, there's 87. There's 87. Even if we're only counting the public ones, that's 29. 29 public universities. I mean, this is crazy. And for everyone to be going to the University of Boulder. I mean, that's crazy. University of Colorado Boulder. I mean, we have Chris Wolf. We have the journalism, in terms of journalism, we have Bill McReynolds, the Santa Claus at the Ramsey home Christmas party, who happened to be a professor of journalism. We have John Andrew, sophomore at the university. I mean, we have John Mark Carr sending emails and all of this correspondence with Michael Tracy, professor at University of Colorado Boulder. I mean, it's like there's no other college in existence except this one, and not that far from the Ramsey home. I mean, this coincidence stack regarding the University of Colorado and how in Boulder and how it intersects all of these persons of interest. And it's just, I don't know what to make of that. I mean, coincidence theorists can really have a field day with that. So apparently, December 25th, 96, he was with his mother and a friend, Harry Smiles. The guy's name is Harry Smiles. At Peachtree Presbyterian Church in Georgia. 8:30 p.m., John Andrew Ramsey to Brad Millard's home in Marietta playing video games. At 9 p.m., Millard was with John Andrew during the ATM transaction at the QT store on Roswell Road in Marietta, Georgia. All right, so if he's at Brad Millard's home, who else is in the home? Is there nobody there? Are there 20 people there that could all corroborate John Andrew's presence? Because that would be interesting. Because according to all this information, the basis for clearing him was the email regarding the testimony of one person, or two if we're counting Melinda, and an ATM receipt. That's it. Not all these other people at all these other places. Okay, at 10:30 p.m., he allegedly went to a movie at Town and Country Movie Theater, Marietta, with Brad Millard and Chris Stanley. After the movie, they went back to Brad's to get car. At 1 a.m., John Andrew Ramsey is at his mother's house in Georgia. Interesting. Very, very interesting. So apparently, he was in Boulder until the 19th, December 19th, and then he left his car parked at a friend's house in Boulder and flew to Atlanta. And then on the 26th, 8:36 a.m., he flew from Atlanta to Minneapolis. He testified in a grand jury September 30th, 1999. Okay, very interesting. Apparently, he was ruled out from the hair found on the white blanket covering Jonbenet's body. He was investigated by Steve Thomas and Ron Gosage. John Andrew Ramsey wrote this statement: "I think it was someone that had intimate knowledge of my family and how we lived day to day. Why would they leave the ransom note on the back staircase instead of the front?" And then, of course, he was officially cleared March 6, 1997 by Boulder Police Department. This was the release March 3rd, 97, Ramsey Case News Release number 32. March 6th update. Various items in the case have been sent to Cellmark Diagnostics in Maryland for DNA testing. Items delivered Tuesday, February 28th. Testing by Cellmark could take up to 6 weeks for results. Boulder police are in receipt of a third set of handwriting samples from Miss Patricia Ramsey. These items were collected by Boulder police Friday, February 28th. Police had difficulty obtaining satisfactory samples because Miss Ramsey is reported to have been taking medication since December 26th. Based on information Boulder police have to date, police are now able to eliminate John Andrew and Melinda Ramsey as potential suspects. Once again, this is March 6th, 1997. John, Andrew, and Melinda are being publicly cleared of involvement to relieve them of stress caused by inappropriate speculation. Boulder detectives traveled to Roswell, Georgia for the express purpose of collecting conclusive evidence that would allow us to eliminate John, Andrew, and Melinda from suspicion in this case. Upon arrival, we were informed that John B. Ramsey had retained attorney James Jenkins, what a name, in Atlanta to represent Lucinda Johnson, Melinda, and John Andrew. Mr. Jenkins declined to allow his client to speak with us. As a result, alternative sources of info had been developed which delayed our ability to publicly issue this information. Okay, very interesting. Okay, now the following month, interesting news item here, April 4th, 1997. Ramsey's son accused in assault. A photographer working for the National Enquirer told police that he was assaulted by John Ramsey's eldest son at Denver International Airport this week. Alan E. Butterfield, 33, of Salt Lake City, said he was photographing John Andrew Ramsey Monday in DIA's concourse. B. Ramsey had just arrived on a flight from Atlanta. Butterfield is a freelance photographer who said he was on assignment for the supermarket tabloid. Ramsey, 20, swung his hands at Butterfield and knocked Butterfield's camera from his hands, the photographer said. The back of the camera was then knocked open and the lens was damaged. Investigators said last month that John Andrew Ramsey is not a suspect in the death of his stepsister, 6-year-old Jonbenet Ramsey. So let's go to some interesting comments from John Andrew Ramsey. This was the Jonbenet Ramsey murder 25 years later. Page 41. Those who were following the case closely through media reports, including other media, were successfully led to the Ramseys did it viewpoint through this daily barrage of untrue information. They framed us for murder. It was a calculated move on their part. It has continued for 25 years, says John Andrew Ramsey, John Ramsey's son from his first marriage. He has the benefit of hindsight and 25 years of being part of the family suspected of killing Jonbenet. He was in college at the University of Colorado when his half-sister was murdered. I suppose enrolled in college would have been a more accurate statement if he's in fact in Georgia at the time of the murder. Here's an interesting post by Searchin' Girl a year ago on the Jonbenet subreddit. This article was written approximately 6 weeks after the death of Jonbenet. There was a rumor floating around that an arrest was imminent in the case because they had heard that DNA testing was due to be returned. So here's the quote from the article here. National media were abuzz Tuesday with rumors of an arrest in the Jonbenet Ramsey murder. City officials issued a news release denying that an arrest was pending. Apparently, reports that DNA testing would take 42 days, meaning the Colorado Bureau of Investigation might complete results this week, spurred calls about an arrest. We're through with some parts of the preliminary processing of some evidence, one source said, but we're not finished with all of the DNA procedures. That last statement is clear as mud. City officials issued a release. One source said, but we're not finished. For the media, it's all about seeking and selling a story to the tabloids. For the officials in Boulder, it almost seems like they were willing to appease the storytellers. And like sharks circling, the press seemed so sure the DNA results were going to lead to the arrest of a male in the Ramsey family. Oh, how ironic that today's bloggers insist the DNA doesn't matter if you are to assume the Ramseys killed their daughter. However, while they were, even back then, waiting for DNA results, they picked up on something, anything, to say about John Andrew. Meanwhile, Jonbenet's half-brother, 20-year-old John Andrew Ramsey, has disappeared, friends said Tuesday. The University of Colorado student returned to Boulder shortly after Jonbenet's funeral, December 31st. He came back, got some things, and now he's vanished, a friend said. I'm really worried because he hasn't been going to class and I haven't seen him in over 3 weeks. City spokesmen have said John Andrew and his sister Melinda were out of state at the time of the incident. Authorities, however, have not named any suspects. The whole thing has just devastated John Andrew, another friend said. He lost one sister in a car accident, and now his other sister is killed. I know this is an incredibly difficult time for him because he was close to Jonbenet. He always talked about how beautiful she was. Ramsey family members, however, would not discuss John Andrew's whereabouts. I've seen him several times, said Pam Powell, John Andrew's aunt who lives in Georgia. He's grieving the loss of his little sister. If his friends truly care about him, they will wait until he contacts them. My guess is the press wasn't happy with Pam's answer, trying to find John Andrew as thought they had a right to know. After all, they seem to think they have the right to know everything about everybody and tell everybody as well. Bloggers too. And even if on some level they know they have no right to know, they don't care. They don't care about Jonbenet, and they certainly don't care about anyone who cared about Jonbenet. I think Jonbenet herself could use some justice. She was brutally murdered and tortured, and that should be respected. Her family, those that care about her the most, want the chance to find her killer, and they need Boulder to give them the DNA profile. So, interesting post here. Very interesting indeed. Another post on the Jonbenet Ramsey subreddit by Elsie Mack, also about a year ago, John Andrew and John Ramsey's most recent interviews. These interviews are such a complete crock of expletive. Anyone that is just blindly believing what these people are telling you is crazy. Research and look at the evidence and you'll see it was blatantly an obvious cover-up. The grand jury voted to indict John and Patsy for helping a third person cover up the crime of murder in the first degree. This family is so full of complete and absolute expletive. They have made money off their daughter's sister's murder while pushing this completely bogus story all out to protect themselves. They have accused so many people, even their best friends, of the murder and completely slaughtered the investigators that worked tirelessly on this case. If this had been a lower or middle class income family, the circumstances would have been completely different. Please do some research before you just assume they are telling the truth. Anyone can lie, especially when they are desperate. Do your research, people. I mean, yeah, it's hard, too, because these are people, regardless of who the perpetrators are, I mean, these are emotionally distraught people. And as we went over in previous episodes, the latest DNA technology has not been utilized in this case. So, it could be, but apparently they don't have that much DNA left, so they would not be able to run the test again. So perhaps if they wait one more generation, they'll get a more accurate result, but by that point, I mean, I don't know. Justice delayed is justice denied, of course. I mean, I don't know. Also, has the briefcase with John Andrews' things and DNA with the blanket, the duvet, all that, has that ever accurately been explained? Because many people think that that points to him and that he was going to try to stuff Jonbenet in the suitcase. I don't know. That doesn't seem logical. I mean, it's not that big of a suitcase. But if John Andrew did have something packed, he had the briefcase, he was going to run away from the house, but he had to abandon the briefcase. And that was the guy running. Now, if it's not John Andrews, some other guy just happened to grab his suitcase with his things in it. I mean, would it be randomly in the basement? Or was that stuff from John Andrews' room that was put in the briefcase that morning or the night before and then moved to the basement? I mean, it just doesn't really make a lot of sense. Alright, let's take a look at John Andrews' bedroom. So this is a post by M May333, also about a year ago on the Jonbenet subreddit. The last time we looked at photos of Jonbenet's bedroom. In keeping with the theme of going by floor and proximity to Jonbenet's room, here are photos of John Andrews' former bedroom. One of the most interesting aspects of this room is that this is where the unsourced rope was found. According to Whitson, this rope has never been tested for DNA or fibers. Some reports state it was found in or near a blue bag on the chair, and others state it was in a brown paper bag. If anyone could add additional info to this, I'd appreciate it. from the WHYD Investigative Archive. A rope was found inside a brown paper sack underneath a bed in the guest bedroom next to Jonbenet's bedroom. This was the room that John Andrew had used when he was home for college. The rope and brown paper sack did not belong to the Ramseys. Lou Smith made the following observations about this room. Quote, whether or not the note was written in this alcove or not, we don't know, but we do know that the ransom note was found on the bottom step of this spiral staircase. From here, it's only a short distance to Jonbenet's room. This is Jonbenet's bedroom, but the door right next to it is the guest bedroom, and there was a real interesting thing that was found out about this room. This window overlooks the garage and the driveway, and would be a great vantage point for anyone that would want to see if the Ramseys were coming home that night. What's interesting about this room, we did see that some of the drawers in the bathroom right off the bedroom were partially open. Looked like they were out of place. Also, in this room, there was a rope, and we don't know where that rope came from. No one can explain why that rope is in this room. Also, what was real interesting in this room, and it's just a small detail, is that there was a dust ruffle that was tucked in except for a small area that seems to have been pulled out. Now, does that mean that the killer may have been under that bed? We don't know. But it's just an observation. One of the small things that detectives look for. He could have been under there, and it would have been a perfect vantage point for him to go right in Jonbenet's bedroom in order to take her out later. Huh! Very interesting. So we do have this mysterious rope that nobody knows anything about that happens to be in John Andrews' bedroom. So even if John Andrews is completely innocent, an intruder could have used their room also to watch out for when the Ramseys came home that night. Some post here. I was thinking about those open drawers and I had a thought. What if the intruder was looking for something that was left for him? If Smith was right and the intruder hid in this room, you have to wonder how he could have been sure this room wouldn't be used. That's always kind of bothered me. So I've thought that the intruder likely hid in the basement. But Lou isn't someone whose opinion I'm going to brush off. Surely this occurred to Lou also. I don't think there's any way in hell this guy is hiding under that bed unless he knows 100% that no one is using that room. How does he know? What did Lou think about this? Inside job, question mark. Could the ransom note and maybe some other stuff have been left for him in those drawers? Huh. Very interesting indeed. Just kind of thinking out loud here, if the rope was found in the brown paper bag, as some sources indicated it was, isn't that kind of odd for an intruder to carry his own tools in a brown paper bag? For one, paper bags are noisy. Two, it ties up one hand. Not ideal at all for breaking into a house. You want something quiet with a strap to free your hands. Suppose it could have been in the bag while inside of a backpack or something, although I still don't see why he would do that. We have some eyewitnesses who saw a stranger approaching the house, but no mention of him carrying anything that I'm aware of. But if this rope was brought into the house by someone else undercover of, say, their employment, perhaps it makes a little bit more sense it would be brought in a paper bag. Maybe play it off as their lunch bag or something. And it's odd that this would be left by the intruder. Why bring it just to leave it? But if the intruder didn't actually bring it, then it's not quite as odd. Perhaps he didn't see it under the bed, didn't realize that the bag had rope in it. Maybe this was even what he was looking for in those drawers. Or maybe it just didn't fit what he had in mind, so he left it. Or alternatively, perhaps there was a change of plans that night. I'm getting real suspicious of the housekeeper. Always kind of wrote her off because I didn't take the ransom seriously. But Lou did, which has made me really consider that possibility. His opinion should be given a lot more weight than probably anyone else's, in my opinion. Who had big financial issues? The housekeeper. Who had knowledge the guest room wasn't being used? The housekeeper. Who would be really worried about being seen as a suspect, worried enough that the ransom note would show the author was really concerned about this? the housekeeper, who would be in the house the day the call from the kidnapper was supposed to come in, the 27th, and would be positioned to know the status of police involvement. The housekeeper. Edit, also rereading her reaction in Perfect Murder, Perfect Town, to finding out Jonbenet was killed. Boy, did she have a strong reaction. I don't want to read into it too much, but imagine she knows about the kidnapping but has no idea that it failed and ended in Jonbenet's death. Here's the excerpt from Perfect Murder, Perfect Town. In the kitchen, the police told the housekeeper that Jonbenet had been murdered. She screamed and couldn't stop shaking. After Hoffman Pow settled down, they asked her to print some words on a sheet of paper. Mr. Ramsey, attaché, beheaded, and the number 118,000, but Linda was too upset to write. Huh. I mean, yeah, that's also impossible to really make anything of that. Interview with John Ramsey regarding the room. We did when we sat down with Linda Art. She wanted to know, kind of get out of the crowd. She would sit down and tell me what to do when the call came, so we went into John Andrews' room. Interesting. So that's the room that they chose. Lou Smith asks John Ramsey, did you look at closets and things in that room? Not that I remember. I'm going to show you a picture of John Andrews' room, and it's picture 29. That's the picture right here, and your head might be in the way there, picture 29. And what is it? You tell me which room that is and see if you can make any observations about that room, and then I will touch on something a little bit later. This was taken during the kidnapping phase. John Andrew responds, it's John Andrews' room. There are some clothes piled on the chair, which isn't unusual. Maybe it's a backpack. Some red thing with a black and white. Looks like it might have been one of Jonbenet's outfits. Clothes stacked. I mean, is it common to just throw clothes all over the place? Like, would Jonbenet's outfits be in John Andrews' room? Or was the kidnapper in there and he was perhaps taking stuff for Jonbenet as well, if there was no initial plan to kill her? Do you remember looking under the bed? John Ramsey shakes his head. Lou Smith asks, take a look at that ruffle on the bed. John Ramsey says, it's disturbed and I didn't look under the bed. It's pulled out. Is that something that would be usual or unusual? Well, it may be a bit unusual. That room didn't get used much, and the cleaning ladies would clean it and make it neat, and Patsy used it to fold laundry on top of the bed, but it didn't get used. Okay, so if she's using it to fold everybody's laundry, I guess that makes sense. So, somebody would have straightened that out when they cleaned the room, I'm sure, but it's a little unusual, I would say. John Andrews' bedroom, did you ever recall any rope or cord being in this room? John Ramsey says, gee, it's possible. John Andrew loved the outdoors. He was there. I stayed in that room. I know he had seemed like his backpack was there for a while, so it wouldn't be. I don't remember seeing any, but it wouldn't be. But he did have things there in his backpack. It wouldn't have been out of the question. Just for the camera, the photographs we are looking at, photo 113, 114, 115, 116. Brian Morgan says, may I just ask one question? Can you tell us, is this the form in which it was originally found? Lou Smith says, no, that's the bag it was put in for evidence. So the paper bag is just evidence. Lou Smith says, evidence bag, and again, that was just found in the room. It was found in a bag in her room. That's all I can tell you at this time. That's kind of weird. They use paper bags for evidence? Huh. An interesting post here. I think... I'm guessing this is referring to the intruder or the murderer or whoever. I think he was pretty familiar with the family's schedule and routines. The killer demonstrates some key inside knowledge. Either that, or when he broke in, he just went for it and lucked out in several ways. Especially in regards to the Ramsey dog. No dog around to bark, but only because the Ramseys were leaving the dog at the neighbors since they were going on vacation. I've long thought that the killer could be a friend of John Andrew Ramsey's from college. That kind of person could learn a lot about the family through seemingly innocuous conversations with John Andrew Ramsey. The killer probably walked all around the house for a while, and though hiding in the basement could make a lot of sense, it wouldn't surprise me if he was in fact hiding under a bed upstairs. Even if it's uncomfortable, he's determined. I mean, and that if that were true, that would just be yet another connection to the University of Colorado Boulder. Another post, I always felt he knew John Andrew was not going to be there because he was aware John Andrew would be away for Christmas. And that may be why he targeted Christmas night. If John Andrew had been home, I don't think this would have happened. I mean, that's an interesting way to put it as well. Apparently, John Andrews said the rope did not belong to him. And the clothes were all there because of the packing for the trip, so supposedly that's not unusual either. It's weird how there's just all of this unconfirmed information and pieces of evidence that have never even been tested. Does this sound like an up-and-up investigation? Also, something interesting, apparently the Steins both worked at University of Colorado Boulder as well. I mean, I'm just reading through the Reddit post here. This is what is stated. I mean, wow. This is also Mindshock. How many connections to the University of Colorado Boulder are there? And apparently, both of the Steins left their high-paying jobs at the University of Colorado to go to Atlanta with the Ramseys when they moved. And then, of course, there is that mysterious 911 call on the night of the 23rd. We've gone over that extensively as well. And Susan Stein's strange behavior at the door when encountering the police. And didn't even let them into the house. I mean, I don't know what to make of that. And it seems like there just keeps... that more and more connections to University of Colorado Boulder just keep popping up. Couple of points against John Andrew Ramsey by not lying dude 8 months ago on the Jonbenet subreddit, on the Jonbenet Ramsey subreddit. I find John Andrew Ramsey suspicious, but I'm unsure of what part he played. He miraculously still has the movie ticket stub from Christmas night to help his alibi. Was he ever picked up on CCTV going into and out of the cinema? That is curious. How many people keep their movie stubs? That is weird, especially rich people. I mean, why would they just be keeping their movie stubs? That is weird. 2, John Ramsey owned 2 planes. Wow, interesting. Could John Andrew Ramsey have been flown to Boulder by the pilot who was given one of John Ramsey's planes supposedly for unpaid wages? Small aircraft do not have to file flight paths. Do we know for sure John Ramsey's planes never left the airport between 25th and the 26th of December 96? CCTV footage ? 3, a man originally thought to be John Andrew Ramsey by 2 neighbors who saw him was seen walking up to the Ramseys' front door late afternoon, December 25th. So was there a second neighbor? I haven't heard this. Was there a second neighbor who saw him that same afternoon, or were they getting confused with the other story about a man running from the Ramsey home the following morning? 4, John Andrew Ramsey said the ransom amount was so low he could have paid it. Did John Andrew Ramsey brag to college colleagues about his father's bonus or wealth? 5, John Andrew Ramsey was said by his college colleagues to be almost obsessed with Jonbenet Ramsey and talked about her constantly. Could he have been the alleged prior molester? There could be more points. Feel free to add to them. So this doesn't necessarily point to any kind of murder on the part of John Andrew Ramsey, but these are curiosities, no doubt. Here's some also interesting comments from John Andrew Ramsey. So this is thesun.com. To catch her killer, my sister, Jonbenet Ramsey 6, was killed to fulfill a fantasy. Here are clues that will lead to murderer's capture. This is relatively recent. Published December 26, 2021. A few months ago by Christopher Eberhardt. The half-brother of murdered pageant queen Jonbenet Ramsey says the 6-year-old was killed to fulfill a fantasy as he pushes for DNA to be used to solve the crime. How would he know, though? John Andrew Ramsey was 23 when the young girl was found murdered on December 26, 96. Wasn't he 20, according to the other information? That's weird. Okay. He was in Atlanta for the holidays when Dad and stepmom Patsy reported Jonbenet missing before finding her body in the basement of the family home 8 hours later. Cops were initially suspicious of Jonbenet's parents as well as her older brother Burke, who were all at the Colorado home at the time she was killed. Yet they were cleared in 2008 after DNA from an unidentified third party was found on the young girl's remains. 25 years after her death, John Andrew has continued to battle for justice for his young sister and pushed Boulder police to pursue DNA testing. However, he has blasted it as a one-sided relationship and claimed they failed to answer his request. I've had a handful of meetings that I've requested over the years, John Andrew exclusively told The Sun. The purpose was to encourage them to pursue DNA testing, but it's a one-sided relationship. They don't say anything to me. They just say it's an ongoing investigation. Despite his claims about the police's lack of action, John Andrews still believes the case can be solved more than 2 decades on. It's going to take a strong investigator. There are a lot of personalities and egos, he said. But now there's a technology component, and we need an investigator to tap into it. I don't care who it is, whether it's someone inside Boulder Police or someone else. I just want someone to get on a podium and say we have our guy. John Andrew added that he believes the person responsible is still alive, as he claimed that they targeted the Ramsey family because of a fantasy. I don't think he's dead. I think it can be solved, but will it? I don't know, he told The Sun. The killer is a narcissistic, sadistic pedophile who latched onto my dad or my sister for his own fantasy. For some reason, our family slotted into his fantasy. Wow, curious words from John Andrew Ramsey. And how would he know the age of this particular criminal? This sadistic pedophile, as he put it. Because if he was already an older guy, why would he think he was still alive? I mean, I don't know. I mean, this is kind of weird. Ransom note: Jonbenet was murdered in her home, Boulder, Colorado, as her parents and brother slept in their rooms, allegedly. Her body was found covered by a white blanket in the family's basement hours after she had been reported missing to police on Christmas morning. A nylon cord was wrapped around her neck while her wrists were bound above her head and her mouth was covered with duct tape. When Jonbenet's parents called 911, they said that the ransom note had been left behind. John Andrew claims that there were signs in the note that could lead to his sister's killer. Referencing the bonus amount and swipes like that in the ransom note, it's showing that I'm smarter than you, he told The Sun. His profile is right in line with that. They stalk their victims. What they do to children, they have to kill them afterwards. It's not something they can sweep under the rug, he added. He seems to have a lot of thoughts on this. Interesting. No charges brought. Jonbenet's death was ruled a homicide, but nobody has ever been charged in the case. It has become one of the highest profile mysteries in the U.S. as videos of Jonbenet competing in pageants were released to the public. After her death, the family were immediately thought of as suspects by the police. A grand jury voted in '99 to charge John and Patsy Ramsey with child abuse, resulting in the first-degree murder of their daughter, but the DA refused to sign the indictment. But there have been many theories, as well as a false confession over the years. On January 10th, 2019, it was reported that a pedophile had admitted he killed the 6-year-old beauty pageant queen Jonbenet Ramsey in a series of letters to a former high school classmate. This is Gary Oliva, 56, is currently serving a 10-year sentence for child abuse images and has been a longtime suspect in the murder. Oliva wrote in his letter, seen by Daily Mail TV from a Colorado prison, I never loved anyone like I did Jonbenet, and yet I let her slip and her head bashed in half and I watched her die. It was an accident. Oliva was arrested in June 2016 and charged with sexual exploitation of a child, according to Inside Edition. DNA testing: the police department was criticized for its handling of the case in the initial stages after the family was allowed to move the body. They have since interviewed more than 1,000 people and received more than 21,000 tips. On Monday, Boulder police said that they have not ruled out using DNA to solve the case. The department said it had been working with state investigators on future DNA advancements as the case progresses. As the department continues to use new technology to enhance the investigation, it is actively reviewing genetic DNA testing processes to see if those can be applied to this case moving forward, it said. It comes after high-profile cases such as the Golden State Killer in California were solved using DNA testing results shared online on ancestry and genealogy sites. It is unclear if this tactic that the Jonbenet investigation plans to take. Monday's statement from police said that there have been nearly 1,000 DNA samples taken already. Wow, can that be true? 1,000 DNA samples? I don't know if I believe that. That's a lot of samples. Are there even 1,000 suspects? I mean, I know they had over 100 suspects, but are there 1,000 suspects? DNA helped to clear Jonbenet's parents and her brother, but unfortunately came 2 years after Mom Patsy had died of cancer. Former DA Mary Lacey called the family victims of this crime. So yeah, interesting statements by John Andrew. He seems to have a very, very interesting and specific opinion about what went down and the profile of the killer. I found one more interesting post. Someone's claiming there is a security video at the ATM of John Andrews' alleged withdrawal, but it's a really blurry, grainy video, and the guy's wearing a baseball cap pulled down over his face. I don't know if that's true. I couldn't find any corroboration on that, but that's all I found there. So feel free to leave your own thoughts, theories, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind in the comment section, because again, with this case, there's so many oddities. And what's bizarre, believe it or not, we're actually only beginning to scratch the surface. I mean, for people that believe this case is a psyop of some kind, not that nobody died, I know there are some proponents of that theory, but a psyop could very well include a real murder and also be a psychological operation. I don't know if I want to do a dedicated podcast on that, even though this is Mindshock. I mean, there's just so many other things to go over. Perhaps if we've exhausted everything else, which we have not, it'll get there, but as of right now, there's just way too many other things to examine. So I hope you guys enjoyed another edition of Mindshock True Crime in the Jonbenet Ramsey series. If you enjoy the podcast, want to help support the podcast, want to help us get more mind-shocking content out there with logic and reason at the forefront, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. You can also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube for access to members-only streams and chats. Like and share the podcast, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcast requests. You can also be a guest in the podcast depending on your tier. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.